Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Council of Graduate Schools webinar, Findings from the 2020 CGS GRE Survey of Graduate Enrollment and Degrees. My name is Matthew Linton, and I'm the Publications and Communications Manager at the Council of Graduate Schools. So just a few webinar logistics before we get started. We encourage you to please submit your questions at any time through the Q&A tab in your Zoom toolbar. We will only be answering questions during the designated Q&A period, which is following the presentations. A reminder that the recording and presentation slides will be emailed to registrants as well as posted to the CGS website after the event, and this usually occurs within 1 week of the live webinar. So our plan for today is that we're going to have 4 speakers who will speak for approximately 45 minutes total, followed by an audience Q&A. The speakers will begin with NU Joe and Janet Gao of the Council of Graduate Schools, who will share findings from the 2020 CGS GRE survey of graduate enrollment and degrees for approximately 25 minutes. Their presentation will be followed by Lawrence Bray, Associate Provost at George Mason University, and Persephone E. Whitfield McDaniels, Dean of the Division of Graduate Studies at Jackson State University, and they will discuss how the findings from the report are reflected on their specific campuses. But before we get to those presentations, it's my pleasure to welcome Suzanne Ortega, President of the Council of Graduate Schools, to give a few brief opening remarks. Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Matt, and welcome, colleagues. We're so glad you can join us today for what I think is a very interesting, comprehensive look at what the impact of the first 8 months of the COVID had on graduate enrollment and applications. I think it gives us confirmation of things that we have known anecdotally, a decrease in international student first-time enrollment, accompanied by a significant increase in the number of part-time enrollees, reflecting both the downsides and the lessons we're learning from COVID. My huge thanks to the research team at CGS, Janet Gao and NU Joe, as well as the team, Matt Linton and others who help us share these findings with you. And of course, deep appreciation to our 2 presenters who will share their reflections and insights on what's happening on their campus. But most of all, thanks to each and every one of you who submitted data that make this report possible. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my talented research team to share with you highlights from the report. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you, Suzanne and Matt. So welcome, everyone. My name is Enyu Jo, and I am with my colleague, Janet Gao, and we are very excited to be here with you all today and to share some key findings of the 2020 CGS GRE survey of graduate enrollment and degree. And we hope that the findings of this report could shed light on how the pandemic has impacted the U.S. graduate education enterprise. Next slide, please. So I'll start with just kind of go over some of the backgrounds of the survey. The survey is jointly sponsored by CGS and GRE board and has been conducted since 1986. And it was designed to provide information about applications for admission to graduate school, graduate student enrollment, and graduate degree confirms. It is important to know that the GND survey makes 2 valuable contributions to the graduate school community. First, it is the only national survey that collects data on first-time and total enrollment across all fields of study. And second, it is the only source of data on graduate enrollment by degree level and the only source of data on applications to graduate school by all broad fields of study. And the survey was sent to 763 U.S. institutions of higher education, including CGS members and regional affiliates between November 2020 to April 2021. We received 73.1% response rate. So despite the pandemic, our response rate was similar to prior years, which we are very happy about that. And as we know, the pandemic and its economic impact continue to impact graduate education over the past year. And it is important to note that the fall 2020 GRE survey was conducted under this context. Next slide, please. So to access the report and data table, you can go to our website under the benchmarking in the graduate and enrollment and degree report. And this year, in addition to the PDF survey report, we also provide downloadable data tables and figures in both Excel and PDF formats, which will be available on our website. Next slide, please. So now we'll spend a few minutes to provide you with information about trends in graduate applications for admission, comparing between doctoral and master's degree. This figure shows the 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year average annual changes to graduate application counts by degree level. So overall, one of the key takeaways, as Susan mentioned, is that our graduate applications has increased by 7.3% between for 2019 and 2020. While looking at it by degree level, both master's and doctoral applications counts increased over the past years. And in particular, graduate applications was driven by a 2.8% increase in doctoral applications and a 9.6% increase in master's applications. And in addition, the numbers of applications has grown over the past 5 and 10-year periods in both the master's and doctoral level as well. Next slide. Also, while master's application has a strong increase, this drives us to think about where did this increase came from. So when we further look at applications by field of study, over the past year, we saw that master's application increase across 6 broad fields of study. And in particular, we saw that bio and agriculture sciences had the largest 1-year increase, which increased by 22%, and followed by business, reported a 19% increase, in social and behavioral science, 16%, math and computer sciences, 14%, physical and earth sciences, 8%, and engineering, 3%. And however, there is no change in arts and humanities master's application over the past year. Next slide. And at the doctoral level, we saw that biological and agriculture sciences also had the largest increase in applications, which is about 11% over the past year. And math and computer sciences reported the second highest 1-year percent increases in doctoral application at about 5%, and followed by arts and humanities, 4%, social and behavioral science, 4%, and physical and earth sciences, 3%. And however, there was no change in health or science in terms of master's and doctoral applications. Next slide, please. So in terms of first-time enrollment, the second biggest key takeaway of this year's report is that overall, there is a 1.8% increase in total first-time enrollment. And when we look at it by degree level, however, there is a 3.8% decrease in first-time doctoral enrollment between for 2019 and for 2020. But the good news is that we saw master's first-time enrollment increase by 2.8%. Next slide, please. So now we'll transition into highlights by selected broad fields of study. We know that overall there is a 1.8% increase in first-time enrollment. Then we take a look at how this trend was various by field of study. And this figure shows the first-time graduate enrollment by 11 broad fields of studies over the past 10 years. In particular, we found that business and health sciences continue to grow its first-time enrollment over the past 10 years. The share of first-time enrollment in business and health sciences remained number 1 and number 2 for 2020. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, sure. However, we saw that there is a large decrease in first-time enrollment in engineering and math and computer sciences over the past year. So despite the decline, the share of first-time enrollment in engineering and math and computer sciences was still ranked number 4 and number 5 among all broad fields of study. And however, we saw that art and humanities also continue to decline its first-time enrollment over the past years. And this number reflects that the overall decrease in international first-time enrollment and the declines in doctoral enrollment during the pandemic. Next slide, please. And in addition, we also found that the rate of growth for social and behavioral sciences and biological and agricultural sciences remain flat over time. While the graduate education enterprise as a whole continues to grow, the growth was robust in some fields and less so for the others. For example, during the pandemic, we saw a large increase of first-time enrollment in health sciences and business, which is likely a sign that the demand for master's and doctoral education continue to respond to the changing workforce needs. And with that, I'll turn it over to Janet to talk about the highlights in graduate enrollment by student demographics.
Thank you, Enyu. So in the fall 2020, over 500,000 graduate students enrolled for the first time in graduate program at all U.S. institutions responding to the GND survey. Approximately 25.9% of all first-time U.S. citizen and permanent resident enrollees were underrepresented minorities, which include 13% Latinx, 12.3% of Black or African American, 0.5% of American Indian and Alaska Native, 0.2% of Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. The share of underrepresented minority among U.S. citizens and permanent residents increased by 1 percentage point from the previous year. Regarding the average annual percent change in URM first-time enrollment, we'll see on the next slide. The annual percent change of Latinx students were greater than all the other groups. That number was 20.4% from 2019 to 2020. The average 5-year annual growth rate was 12.9% compared to the average 10-year annual growth rate of 9.2%. Similarly, among U.S. citizens and permanent resident graduate students, the first-time enrollment also increased by 16% among Black or African American students. However, the growth rate is slightly lower than their Latinx counterparts. Although the baseline enrollment number is small, American Indian and Alaska Native first-time graduate enrollment continued to grow in the past year, which is encouraging. From 2010 to 2020, the average annual growth rate for first-time graduate enrollment increased by only 0.8% among American Indian and Alaska Native. For just a year between 2019 and 2020, there was an 8.8% increase, larger than the prior cycle, which was 3.5%. Though promising, we do want to know that by the field of the study, there is proportionally more domestic students of color, some fields, such as social and behavioral sciences and education. In the other fields, however, the representation of a traditional underserved student of color remained relatively low, particularly in STEM field. How about the total graduate enrollment by race and ethnicity? Let's take a look at next slide. Similar to the trends of a first-time graduate enrollment among underrepresented students of color, there were healthy increase in total graduate enrollment among these groups. Between 2019 and 2020, total enrollment increased by 11.3% among Latinx, 9.6% among Asian and Pacific Islanders, 8.1% among Black or African Americans, 2.3% among American Indian and Alaska Natives. We also saw that the total graduate enrollment grew annually over the last 10 years. As the purple dot line on the graph shows, the representation of Latinx graduate students was 12.4%, a slight growth from a decade ago. The shares of Black or African American students was 10.9%, growing at a much slower rate than the Latinx counterparts as indicated by the green line. It is important to note that the overall share of underrepresented minority in total graduate enrollment among US citizens and permanent residents, however, remains disproportionately low. One of the highlights of this report is the first-time enrollment by citizenship status, which is on the next slide. When not disaggregated by citizenship status, first-time enrollment increased despite the pandemic. The top bar shows that the total first-time graduate enrollment increased by 1.8% between 2019 and 2020. Among the US citizen and permanent residents, there has been a large increase, around 12.9% between 2019 and 2020, much larger than the prior year's increase, which was 2.2%. In contrast, the share of first-time international enrollment declined substantially. In fall 2019, 20% of first-time enrollment were international, but in 2020, international graduate students only occupied 12.6% of the total population. Regarding the trend for international first-time graduate enrollment, though there has been 1 year decrease since 2015, 37.4% decrease for the first-time international graduate student enrollment between 2019 and 2020 was more significant, which we believe were largely attributed to the global pandemic and accompanying travel restrictions. The program with large shares of the international graduate students were particularly hard-hit, as the next slide shows. Though the decline in international first-time enrollment was across all fields of study, the decrease is more significant in engineering by 47.9%, mathematics and computer science by 46.4%, followed by physical and earth science, which was 42%. By contrast, continuing with our next slide, domestic first-time graduate enrollment grew by 12.9% between fall 2019 and fall 2020. Increase were largest in business by 29.2%, mathematics and computer science by 20.1%, followed by biological and agricultural sciences, which was 18.4%. How about the first-time enrollment by degree level and gender? We've outlined those points on the next slide. In fall 2020, women comprised 61.4% of first-time enrollees at the master and graduate certificate level, a larger share than at the doctoral level, which was 57%. Across all degree level, institutions participating in the GND survey reported a 4.6% increase in the first-time graduate enrollment of women between 2019 and 2020, while men saw a slight decrease by 2.1%. By degree level, as the bar shows, women first-time graduate students increased by 5.2% at the master degree and certificate level, and by 1.2% at the doctoral level, while men decreased by 0.7% at the master degree and certificate level, and stayed the same at the doctoral level. Why don't we continue with a look at the first-time enrollment by broad field and gender on the next slide? We know that the overall majority of the graduate students are women, and institution reported that women constitute more than 3/4 of a first-time graduate enrollment in fields of public administration and services, health sciences, and education in fall 2020. However, women are still underrepresented in certain fields. For example, they comprise a much smaller portion of first-time enrollment in the fields of engineering, mathematics and computer science, and physical and earth sciences. Another highlight in this report is on first-time enrollment by attendance status. Let's take a look at the next slide. As institutions changed mode of instruction and offered virtual or hybrid learning options, many delivered course in part-time formats to accommodate students who were placebound or not able to pursue graduate education in person. In fall 2020, 37.5% of first-time graduate students were part-time, compared to 33.7% of a part-time student in fall 2019. Among the 3 largest broad fields for first-time graduate enrollment, 40.1% of a business, 55.4% of education, and 35.2% of health sciences first-time enrollment were part-time students. In terms of a trend of a part-time enrollment, first-time enrollment of part-time graduate saw a 13.5 increase between fall 2019 and fall 2020, while full-time graduate enrollment decreased by 3.7%. The growth in the first-time part-time graduate enrollment was largest in business, biological and agricultural sciences, and engineering. So this concludes the presentation of the findings from the 2020 CGS GRE survey of a graduate enrollment degree. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bree, the Associate Provost for the Graduate Education at George Mason University, and Dr. McDaniel, the Dean of Division of Graduate Study at Jackson State University. They will discuss how the findings from GEND report are reflected on their respective campus. Dr. Bree.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the entire CGS team for inviting me today. I am Lawrence Bray, the Associate Provost for Graduate Education. I did put my email here. If you don't get a chance to ask all your questions, feel free to contact me directly. Next slide, please. So a little bit about George Mason before I get into the data specifically. George Mason University is the largest public research university and the most diverse and innovative institution in Virginia. If you don't know, we are located in Fairfax, about 15 miles from Washington, D.C. And we have been identified as one of the best U.S. universities under 50 years old. Our research growth has been incredible for the past couple of years, with a 32% increase in research expenditures over the past 3-4 years. In terms of our graduate programs, we have 95 master's degree programs and 38 doctoral degree programs, as well as a number of graduate certificates. I think we are approaching about 100, 105 right now. In terms of our student population, we have about 10,000 graduate students. That includes the graduate certificate students as well. And 23% of that population is at the doctoral level. 63% are part-time, which is pretty typical for our institution at the graduate level, a lot of part-time students, and 69% are in-state students. And as you see on the photo, because of promoting and really having diversity and innovation as part of our tradition, a lot of our students come from multiple different countries and different states. At the graduate level, we represent about 130 countries and 50 states across all of our graduate student population. So that is about Mason. Next slide, please. digging in a little bit, so this slide concentrates mainly on master's and doctoral degree seeking students only. So this is why you see the 9,660 students, a little bit less than the 10,000, because that does not include graduate certificates. But if we look at specifically master's and doctoral degree seeking students, our population, our international student population is about 13% at Mason. We are 52% underrepresented in relation to racial and ethnicity area. And I also wanted to highlight our first generation graduate students. About 15% of our master's and doctoral students are first generation. So a lot of diversity on our campus, as you can see. And I will move on to some more enrollment specific data. Next slide, please. So in relation to the report, applications for admission, as you can see on the table right there, using fall 2019 as a baseline, we have had a significant increase of applications from fall 19 to fall 20. I think this aligns pretty well with the national trends presented. If we start looking at our preliminary data for 2021, which is a little bit outside the scope of the report, but still I thought relevant to this discussion, again, these are preliminary numbers. We are seeing a little bit of a decrease at the master's level, but still a significant increase at the doctoral level. Again, these numbers are still changing, but this is where we are currently. If we're looking at this incredible increase from fall 19 to 20, and also a doctoral increase from 20 to 21, I would like to attribute this growth to, well, not only the pandemic, which has brought a lot of changes and challenges to, I think, all the institutions, but at Mason specifically, the increase in our research portfolio and funding opportunities. There has been a lot of innovations in that space, primarily because of our new School of Computing and several research institutes and transdisciplinary centers, which provide a lot of different opportunities for our graduate students, especially doctoral. The three institutes that I would like to mention that we have at Mason are our BioHealth Innovation Institutes, our a digital innovation, which is more on the computing side, and our Sustainable Earth Institute on sustainability. So because of these different factors, in addition to more innovative online programs, I think we can attribute a lot of our growth at Mason to this different changes, but also I think enhancements at our institution, in addition to the effect that the pandemic has had. Next slide, please. If we look at an enrollment, so on the left-hand side, you see the first-time enrollment and then the total enrollment in the table on the right. Again, similarly to what was presented in the report, at the master's and doctoral level, we saw a significant increase from fall 19 to fall 2020 in the first-time enrollment, 10% and about 5% at the doctoral level. If we look at our preliminary number for fall 2021, we are so far seeing a decrease for first-time enrollment. However, if you're looking at our total enrollment, we are actually in the positive, both from 19 to 20 and from 20 to 21. So a lot of this percentages are attributed to many different, I think, reasons, but I will mention a couple. In terms of seeing a difference between total enrollment and first-time enrollment, especially this coming fall, there has been a lot of initiatives around retention, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion for our underrepresented minorities. So even though we're seeing a decline in first-time enrollment, it looks like for this fall, this current fall, we have been able to retain more graduate students overall. And we're still seeing, an increase in total enrollment. I will mention a couple of specific areas that this enrollment is attributed to as well. Mason is just a few miles from the new Amazon's new headquarters, which has come with a lot of different initiatives. And Mason has committed a lot of resources towards increasing and retaining graduate students from computing related fields, especially being one of the main producers of graduate degrees in the tech talent in Virginia. Because of these opportunities and this commitment, graduate students tend to have a lot of opportunities with partners in the government side, agencies, nonprofit, and so forth, which also creates a lot of internship and employment opportunities. So a lot of our growth or enrollment increases are attributed to tech talent or computer science, computer engineering, and software engineering programs. Next slide, please. And I think this is my last slide. I just wanted to dig in a little bit more into enrollment in terms of international students and underrepresented minorities. I think in relation to the report, Mason has also seen a big decline from fall 19 to fall 20 in our international student population at the graduate level. But if we look at our preliminary numbers in fall 2021, it looks like this trend is shifting towards a much bigger number on the positive side. So again, this is preliminary, but we are hopeful that our international student population is going to increase this year and hopefully in the years to come. On the underrepresented minority side, we have really spent a lot of time and efforts and resources to better support our underrepresented minorities. And you can see this has been shown in terms of the numbers, especially if you look at Black and African-American students. We have seen an increase in both fall 2020 and fall 2021, and similarly in our Latinx population. We are very proud of our diverse graduate student population at Mason. We continue to not only welcome and include a very aspirational student population, but also support them once they are at our institution through many different support services, and to make sure that not only they stay in the programs, but they also cross the finish line and get their master's and doctoral degree. So I will leave you with just some of our tradition at Mason is really providing access to traditional and also non-traditional graduate students. So all students are welcome to Mason, as you can see in those numbers. So I will stop here, and I would like to proudly pass the presentation on to Dr. Magdanos for the next presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bray. Good afternoon. I'm Persephone McDaniels, the Graduate Dean at Jackson State University. Jackson State is considered Mississippi's premier urban research university. It's a historically Black university, or HBCU, with the Carnegie designation as an R2 or high research activity university. JSU is one of 11 HBCUs with this designation. There are currently 110 listed HBCUs, 100 excluding community colleges. Among them, JSU ranks number 16, according to US News and World Report, their 2021 report. Our graduate programs count includes 34 masters, 1 education specialist, and 13 doctoral programs. You can see that our race or ethnicity data looks a little different from what Dr. Bray just presented. Our Black or African-American student population is 91.1% of our total enrollment. Our Caucasian or white enrollment is 5.5%, Asian 0.8%, American Indian 0.4%, and multiracial students reported 1.1%. Our highest non-Black enrollment lies in the College of Science and Technology, and also the College of Ed and Human Development. Our comparative fall to fall total enrollment shows fall 2019 7,020 students. That's our total enrollment. And then you'll see a slight decrease for fall 2020, our overall enrollment of 6,921. That number looks very different when it comes to our graduate students. Our international student enrollment shows for fall 2019, 3.3% of our total enrollment, and in fall 20, 3.1% of our total enrollment. Not a huge drop in students, but when your international enrollment is this number, we can feel the difference. We've also seen quite a few requests for deferred admissions letters, some up to 2 semesters because of difficulty with immigration paperwork and so forth, not just on the US side, but also in their specific or respective home countries as well. Slide 2, please. JSU specific fall to fall semester enrollment and application numbers are consistent with the national trends as reported by CGS. You'll see that our fall 2019 graduate enrollment was 1,868. And then you'll see our fall 2020 actually increased to 2,253. This shows an increase also in the percentage of graduate students at our university that make up total enrollment. In fall 2019, that was 26.61%, and it increased to 32.5% of the total enrollment. Also, you'll see on those same data lines that we increased for first-time graduate students from 506 to 958, showing an increase of 89% among our first-time graduate students. The university also experienced an increase in JSU online degree programs as a whole, including both undergraduate and graduate programs, increasing from fall 2019, 1,042, to fall 2020, 1,406 students, showing a 35% increase in total online degree program enrollment from 19 to 20, fall to fall. Also looking at graduate applications, you'll see that we had a 52% increase in total graduate applications from 2019 to 2020, fall to fall, moving from 1,240 to actually 1,885 total applications received. Slide 3, please. Let's take a look at an example comparing our fall 2019 and fall 2020 doctoral program enrollments. As you can see, there were increases in enrollments in 10 of our 13 doctoral programs. All were slight increases except those highlighted, such as in public health and urban higher education. The urban higher education program is one which is an accelerated doctoral program geared toward middle level administrators at higher ed institutions. You can also see the highlighted decline in the computational data science enabled engineering program as well. Increased enrollment in public health and decreased enrollment in the CDS&D engineering program are consistent with national trends. In addition, in our master's programs, we saw increases in teaching, social work, and business, significant gains in those areas. For example, in social work, we went from 165 students enrolled to 226. In our MBA program, from 55 to 69. But we had an amazing increase in the Master of Arts in Teaching program, which is highlighted on the next slide. So increased graduate enrollment and some factors for considering what led to the increase. We looked at pandemic challenges, COVID-19 student victims, and students student turned healthcare providers. Also students moving from employment to unemployment. We looked at standardized test waivers at universities across the country and those instituted by other agencies as well. So although we waived the GRE and the GMAT in our programs, the Mississippi Department of Education actually waived the ETS praxis test scores that had been required for teacher licensure in the state. That increase shows you the Master of Arts moving from 72 students to 455 from fall to fall 1920. And looking at our fall 2021 numbers, we are still slightly above now the 455. And we expect that to increase at least into the next year as well. So that was showing a whopping 630% increase, actually. Slide 5, please. So our increased graduate enrollment made us take a good hard look at our pertinent student support services, including those guided by our retention strategies at the university as well. Our Division of Academic Affairs actually instituted a weekly Lunch and Learn presentation series open to all JSU faculty, staff, and administrators. 2 of those were focused on student support services, which included a graduate student focus. Attendance for those series actually ranged around 125, sometimes a little bit lower, sometimes a little bit greater. In these sessions, graduate student support services included the following. We discussed looking at the classroom professor as an expert, encouraging the professors to encourage their students to meet with them regularly, to develop written plans for student success, written plans for monitoring student progress, and also encouraging the professor to provide information on support services and resources across the university. We also encourage professors to make sure that they connected students with our writing center, which actually provides student support services on writing feedback, help with personal statements, providing workshops, writing group support, research documentation, and even assistance with visual presentations that students may need for classes. We also encouraged our faculty to, in using Canvas support items such as tutorial videos with their students, or encouraging students to load the app onto their devices. And also we pointed out the recommendations from the Council of Graduate Schools, a recent publication supporting graduate student mental health and well-being, encouraging students to seek out a work-life school balance that supported or had positive gains on their health. And then we also took a look at providing some graduateschools.com's tips for success in graduate classes, looking at attendance, attention, participation, preparation, and items like integrity, and even going back to just good old-fashioned note-taking and paying attention. So those were some support services and items that we looked at with faculty and staff, also encouraging staff to remember that they have that direct connection with students as well, and encouraging some of these same things. Thank you so much for your attention to these slides in my presentation and for the opportunity to present. We've been working towards making sure that we are reducing the number of barriers to student success at Jackson State University. In graduate studies, we've also enabled our graduate policy committee to take a look at some of our policies to make sure that they are aligned with research and best practices that will support our students from admissions to the close of their programs, completing out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. McDaniels, and thank you to all of the presenters for their great presentations. We're now moving on to the question and answer portion from the audience. So if you have a question, please put it in the question and answer box at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. We'll get to as many as possible. If you'd like a particular speaker to answer the question, please do put that in the question for us. So April Bolton asks, we'd like to hear some of the approaches George Mason University is employing to support their students of color so well.
Thank you for the question. There has been a lot of, like I said in my presentation, a lot of efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion at George Mason University. All of our different colleges and schools and offices have developed DEI plans, and which applies directly to supporting graduates, students, especially students of color. I do have to say that it is a partnership with the academic units, and our university life has played also a big role with different services to support students. I would emphasize the mentoring piece that we're still working very hard on, providing the faculty and our staff members with different programs and training to better support our graduate students. So this is still in the making, but a lot of efforts in that space. I think we still have a long way to go, but definitely moving in the right direction to support all of our students, but also especially our underrepresented minorities.
Thank you. And so we've got another question actually from April Bolton. She'd like to hear from Persephone about how their MAT program has grown so quickly. In particular, how do they address the need for student teaching in such a program that is often a challenge for working adults to complete?
Yeah, can I start out by saying 2 words, growing pains, but they are really wonderful pains to have right about now. So yes, those have been some challenges. So as you can definitely probably already guess, we had to increase our staff support for that program. We also had to increase faculty teaching in the program immediately. And with the teaching, with teaching placements, that staff has been increased because the students actually definitely needed assistance with those placements. So we have worked very closely with our surrounding school districts in making sure that those placements are made. Also assisting students in finding some of their own placements. One thing that we noticed about a lot of the students who were coming into the program is that they were already working in school districts, but not as certified teachers. So they were able to connect with their own school districts, and that assisted us greatly in making sure that those teaching internship placements were in place and on time. A lot of paperwork increases came along as well because the certification paperwork had to be sent in for all of these students to the Mississippi Department of Education as well. So they helped us to streamline the process in getting those students getting their paperwork completed and getting their placements done. So thank you for that question.
So we've got a question for both of our guest presenters. So we've heard a lot about deferrals as a challenge during the pandemic. Have you experienced a large number of deferrals on your particular campuses, and how are they impacting kind of cohorts downstream from those deferrals?
I'll go first.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please go.
I'll go first because I mentioned it just a little bit that we have seen an increase and that our policy already made students know that they had 12 months for their admissions. You know, you get an admission letter, it's good for 12 months anyway. So our updating for the next semester or the semester beyond was pretty routine based on the policy that we already had. We have not seen a lot beyond that yet, but we expect that we will have some starting next semester.
At George Mason, we have spent quite some time, especially through our graduate council body, to look at our policies and procedures to adapt the best we can with some of the challenges that COVID or the COVID-19 pandemic has brought. So in relation to deferrals specifically, our current policy states that students have up to 1 year to defer. And again, to adapt based on challenges that especially our international students have faced. We have expanded that policy to up to 2 years. So accepting deferrals to up to 2 years. And to really give the time for students, having visa issues or other circumstances to still be able to come and defer to the following year or up to 2 years. So that's the kind of adaptation or flexibility that we have tried to provide. But we are definitely seeing a lot of deferrals or requests for deferrals, especially in the international student population.
Great. So we've got a question here for Janet and Enyu. So a lot of the case studies that we've gotten from our guest speakers have focused on larger institutions. Could you talk about some of the trends you're seeing at small private colleges and if those smaller schools differ in any way from what we've been hearing from our other panelists?
Sure. So thank you for the question. So in terms of applications for admissions to graduate school, for private not-for-profit, we do saw there is a 9.2% increase in applications compared to the 6% increase in applications in the public universities. However, in terms of first-time graduate enrollment for private and private institutions, we do saw a slight decrease of 0.7% between 2019 to 2020.
I also want to chime in. We disaggregate data by Carnegie classification, which refers to R1, R2, and master colleges, and institution type by public and private. So if you refer to the small college in particular, we have for the master colleges, we have a 2.8% increase. Which is comparatively lower than the R1 and R2 institution. That's for the application. But for the first-time enrollment, the master's college, public colleges increased by 8.6%, but the private decreased by 5.2%. I hope this helps.
Great, thank you both. So I think we've got another question here for Janet and Enyu. Could you share the application increase for URM students? I saw the enrollment increase for URM students, but not application numbers. Thank you. And that might be also if there are page numbers or a specific area where you refer to those application increase numbers.
So for this question, unfortunately, we do not collect application data by race and ethnicity. So the GND data only collects applications by degree level and by field of study. So unfortunately, we don't have this data available.
Okay, thank you, Enyu. So we've got time, I think, for one more question. I'm going to put it to our two guest presenters. So what was the most surprising part of the pandemic for you from an enrollments perspective? What was the biggest surprise? I feel like it was a period of kind of shock and awe. So looking back, what's the thing that stands out as the biggest surprise in enrollments for you? Dr. McDaniels, would you like to start?
The increase period. And then of course, the Master of Arts in Teaching program. Because it was so great. And then we had to make some quick adjustments as well. But keeping in mind that we had to definitely still provide support to the students.
Dr. Bry?
Yes, definitely the increase as well, though it looks like if we're looking at fall 2021, we seem to see a different trend coming ahead of us. But it's also, once we have additional students in our programs, is having the capacity to best support them. So the increase itself was a good thing and also a scary thing, and to some extent, right? Just to make sure we, like I said, we have the support and the services to for all of our graduate students once they are enrolled and in our programs.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, the audience, for your great questions. Thank you to Dr. McDaniels and Dr. Bry for your wonderful guest presentations. And thank you to Drs. Gao and Joe for your incredible hard work on getting this survey and this report completed. We just have a couple of final slides before we close out. So the first is that we do have some upcoming CGS surveys to inform you about. So the fall 2021 CGS International Graduate Admissions Survey is currently in the field. The deadline for that survey is Friday, November 12th, 2021. If you have not received the survey invitation, and you should have, please contact research@cgs.nche.edu so that we can get you that information. The fall 2021 CGS GRE survey of graduate enrollment and degrees will launch in the coming weeks. We also have a couple of events coming up. We have 2 webinars, Building a Graduate Enrollment Ecosystem, Experienced Leaders Share Best Practices, and that's coming up on Thursday, October 28th, and that is sponsored by Liaison. We also have Mitigating the Caregiving Burden Among Graduate Students, Policies, Programs, and Practices coming up on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021 from 2 to 3 p.m. And of course, don't forget the CGS 61st Annual Meeting, which is happening December 1st through 4th, 2021 at the Sheraton New Orleans Hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana. We look forward to seeing you all, and we miss seeing all of you in person. So we're really looking forward to that. Thank you again, everybody who came today, for the audience, for your great questions, to our guest presenters, Dr. McDaniels and Dr. Bry, for your incredible insights. And we look forward to doing this soon and seeing you all again. Thank you very much.
Matt, you have a question in the chat.
Yes, we do. We don't have hard copies that we're going to be sending out. They're only digital. So if you would like us to send you a digital copy, please email me. Thank you very much. And we will now be closing out the session. Goodbye.